Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today, we're talking about the science of marijuana and academic outcomes. Dr. Jason Kilmer has been studying the population of teens and young adults, primarily college students, where marijuana has become the drug of choice. His findings may surprise you. Welcome to the show, Dr. Kilmer. Please share a little bit about yourself, your work, and why we're here today to talk about marijuana.
Peter, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the work that you do. My PhD is in clinical psychology. I'm an associate professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle. And I've been part of a team that for years has been doing research on college student alcohol use, cannabis or marijuana use, other drug use, but I think importantly, prevention and intervention efforts in response to that.
Now, when you're looking at this emerging threat, so many people around the country in states where it's not legal or there's not a large medical program all talk about the fact that there really isn't much dangerous about marijuana. Yet you're right in the middle of sort of a hotbed of marijuana legalization. What are we learning there? Because I think some of us take pride in learning from what I might call other people's mistakes, but are there mistakes that we should know about?
I think the narrative has changed. I think as recently as this week, people are acknowledging as we approach 10 years of legalization in the state of Washington, the products have changed, the methods of use have changed, the potency has changed. And I think arguably, Peter, that's the thing that researchers have tried to catch up on the most. When you hear about people who are older today, reflecting on their time in the 1970s, and they say that they, in quotes, smoked grass, it's because it was practically grass. 1.5% THC, which is the active cannabinoid that usually drives the, in quotes, high in marijuana. In the 80s, 2 to 3% THC. By the 90s, 4, 5, 6. Smokable flower or bud in my state typically ranges between 20 and 30% THC. The concentrates, hash oils, dabbing has become a verb. There are dab pens that people use to use these concentrates, range from 60 to 90% or higher. When people say it's natural, potencies at that level just don't occur in nature. So I think that the main thing we've seen is science has really caught up on what it means, what the risks are associated with high potency cannabis.
Well, if it's not natural, what is it?
I mean, the concentrates, we'll start with that. These are extracting these isolated cannabinoids. So butter, you hear it referred to, shatter, these are products, the hash oils, dabs, that people use with dab pens for dabbing. Again, that's become this verb. These are these isolated concentrates that are just a potency that does not occur. I heard a researcher this week say it's not the plant anymore. This is this extracted gooey substance that really isn't the plant anymore. When we look at the potencies in smokable flower or bud, these are bred. These are created high potency strains that are being bred in this way. And so, again, it's just really recognizing that when people say, especially when we hear people who are older today, if they say, well, I used when I was younger and I turned out fine, they use different stuff.
You know, it's funny because when I used when I was younger, and I might have turned out fine for my own opinion, but I knew plenty of people that didn't, and even at that low of potency. Now, we're also hearing rumors that, especially with Canadian cannabis companies, that even though Canada is really reeling back on cannabis because they're seeing a lot of problems up there, but where they're talking about synthesizing it without even growing it anymore. Is that possible?
You hear about synthetic products, and that's leading to confusion as well. I mean, again, when I look at even 10 years ago, there was this, I think that the products that people are seeing weren't even on the horizon. People weren't even discussing things like this. There are synthetic cannabinoids that some people even see as a loophole, if you will, around some of what is considered legal and not legal. So yes, there are things that can be done synthetically. The risks associated with that, for ethical reasons, we just don't see a lot of research being done in a prospective way. So I do know that that's something that both prevention people, intervention researchers, and scientists in general are trying to keep their fingers on the pulse of.
Now, what are you seeing as usage in Washington? Because you've been doing it for 10 years now. Now here, there's a strong argument that says legalizing and medicalizing marijuana products, as long as you prohibit the use under 21, does not contribute to underage use. And yet, from what I'm hearing, that's sort of far from the truth.
So I think that the thing to keep in mind when we look at norms is that every age group we look at in the United States, most people aren't using. We'll hear things like, quote, everyone uses weed, and that's a misperceived norm. We can correct those misperceived norms when we have accurate data. The age group that tends to use the most, 18 to 25-year-olds. And we just got published this year an article that shows that after implementation of legalization, when we look at from 2014, before stores opened, and in the 5 time point since, in that 18 to 25-year-old age group, any past year use over time has significantly increased. At least monthly use has increased, at least weekly use has increased, and even at least daily use has increased. When we do a deeper dive, there are some of those frequency domains that are really being driven by the 21 to 25-year-olds. It's those that are gaining access to a legal market that we do see a particular increase. But I've heard someone say, is it just the more people are trying it? What we're showing is more people are not only trying it, but increasing their frequency of use. And the other thing we've seen significantly go up is endorsing symptoms associated with being addicted, endorsing 2 or more symptoms associated with cannabis use disorder criteria. And that becomes noteworthy when we look at things like addiction potential for people.
Well, let's take a close look at that after we take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Jason Kilmer. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're here with Dr. Jason Kilmer from the University of Washington to talk about the latest research findings about the growing risk of marijuana use and its impact on academic performance. And at the root of this is probably the idea of addiction. Can you tell us more about this, Jason?
I think one of the things we hear all the time is people say, well, weed is not addictive. And I've even had students that I've met with say, I feel like I might be addicted, but is that possible? The answer is yes. And I hear people go, is that new? That's not new. The terminology has changed. What people use for diagnostic purposes is called the DSM-5. When there was the DSM-4 and earlier, we talked about cannabis dependence and cannabis abuse. The terminology changed in 2013, and we talk about cannabis use disorder. There's a number of different criteria, and it's based on the number of symptoms that people endorse or criteria that people meet that suggests, are they meeting criteria for mild, moderate, or severe cannabis use disorder?
And when we talk about that DSM, to make a long story short, that's sort of the Bible for treatment professionals and insurance companies to determine what is a valid disease that needs to be treated and can be dealt with some form of insurance or something like that. Is that correct? It's
the diagnostic and statistical manual that does as much clear criteria as possible for what it means if someone's dealing with an issue like that. Correct. Okay. So what I think people often get surprised is not only is cannabis use disorder in there, so is cannabis withdrawal. People, I think, sometimes are surprised to hear that withdrawal is possible, but what we're aware of on college campuses is some of the very reasons students claim that they use could actually be signs of withdrawal. We hear people say, I use because I like getting high, or it gives me something to do with my friends, or it helps when I'm bored, or it makes things more fun. But they also say things like, helps when I feel depressed, helps when I feel anxiety, relieves stress, helps when my appetite stinks, helps me fall asleep, helps relieve headaches. What are some of the criteria for cannabis withdrawal? depressed mood, anxiety, appetite problems, sleep problems, and headaches. So if someone says, I'm confident that it helps my anxiety, we'll ask them, how do you know? And if they say, I use weed every day, and last week I ran out for a couple of days, it was brutal. I felt terrible. Couldn't sleep. Got my hands on weed again. My anxiety got better. I could sleep again. See, it helps. That might not be cannabis helping underlying anxiety. That might be resuming substance use, making withdrawal stop. And
Well,
that's
this is something they talked about with opioids. That people prescribed in the past, when doctors prescribed them based on false information, people would become addicted. And they said many of the same things, that they needed it, again, thinking they were treating the problem, but really they were just addicted.
Yeah, I mean, I think about people who are struggling and the disservice that's done when they're assured it's not addictive. We would never say that to someone with other substances. And so the good news is, I think there are enough recovery support, treatment options for people who say, I really need assistance in making a change in my cannabis use. I think we're getting there.
Now, what is the prevailing sentiment of say, college students, kids coming from high school to college, where you study your populations? Are they walking in already tuned up as freshmen that marijuana is okay? I mean, is it high school where we see the inception, or middle school?
My experience is that they're hungry for the science. They've read things on different social media outlets. They've heard, people vocally support or maybe vocally oppose. They want to know what the science says. And what better place than a college campus to really get into the science? And that's where I think we get interested in sharing with them the science on things like academic impacts, because I do think we've got these very driven college students who want to succeed. And there's very clear research that decisions that they make about substance use could actually get in the way of that success.
How does marijuana use get in the way of academic success?
The short answer is, the research shows that the more frequently people use cannabis or marijuana, the lower their grade point average tends to be, the more classes they report skipping, the less likely they are to graduate on time, if they even make it to graduation. The longer answer is that it probably has an impact on cognitive abilities. The part of the brain that affects, among other things, attention, concentration, and memory is called the hippocampus. After cannabis use, the neurons in that part of the brain get suppressed. They fire, but they fire at a rate that's lower and slower than they could or should be firing. A Harvard scientist, Dr. Harrison Pope, in the 1990s said, we want to test that with college students, and showed that 24 hours after cannabis use, there were measurable decreases in those cognitive abilities. That same scientist showed, because people said, what is that causal? Maybe people who struggle with attention are attracted to marijuana use. So he said, ethically, we can't take people who don't use and make them start, because that's unethical. But what if we take people who use every day and have them quit? We follow them over time. If we follow them over time and their cognitive abilities stay the same, maybe they were there to start with. But if as they abstain, their cognitive abilities improve, that's causal. It takes 28 days, but 4 weeks after stopping daily cannabis use, there are no longer any measurable impacts on attention, concentration, or memory compared to a control group of people who've never used in their life. And that research continues to be replicated.
That's really amazing. And yet I didn't even know that. and I'm a relative expert on this. I mean, I knew that it affected the attention span, but I didn't realize that study actually proved what would happen if you stopped using.
Think about the challenges. I mean, I have a colleague that did work with 15 to 19-year-olds who were initiating abstinence, and showed that, and they weren't using daily, they were using on average every other day. Verbal learning took 2 weeks of abstinence to match that of people who don't use. Verbal working memory, 3 weeks of abstinence. Attention takes a long time. So imagine when you're working with a student that says, I have ADHD, I'm prescribed something for it. I mean, we can look them in the eye and say, cannabis is a terrible fit. We know of no substance more associated with causing attention decreases, let alone worsening existing ones. When they go, I don't know if that's true, because when I don't use, I can't sit still, that's withdrawal. One of the symptoms of withdrawal is restlessness, not being able to sit still.
That's fantastic. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to talk to Dr. Kilmer a little bit more about the emerging trends and research findings about marijuana use. See you all after the break.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here.
Wait. What?
I can't drive.
Why?
My.
Oh.
Not all internet is priced this good. Switch to Extreme and go super fast for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Oh yeah, hook up your home with powerful Wi-Fi, 99.99% reliability, and speeds that are FCC proven to be faster than advertised. Not all internet is priced this good. Switch today and get speeds starting at 100 meg for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Call 844-EXTREME2 for details.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with research scientist Dr. Jason Kilmer about marijuana and some of the dramatic lessons we've learned about marijuana use, not the least of which is an impact on sleep, which we know is so important to great health. Jason, can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that the scientific advances around cannabis and sleep and the conversations we've been able to have with students have been amazing. What do we hear from students? Certainly they're tired a lot. And when we even ask nationwide, the American College Health Association asks in their National College Health Assessment, what gets in the way of doing the way you want to do in school? Students say stress, anxiety, sleep problems. And the irony is their use of cannabis at night could not only cause those things, I mean, bare minimum, they could be worsening those things. What we hear people say is, if I use it at night, I fall asleep faster. That's possible. The onset of sleep may be more rapid. There are sedative properties. There are hypnotic properties. People hear hypnotic and they think hypnosis. That means sleep inducing. So if people say, if I use and I get tired or I fall asleep faster, that could be true. But we ask people on nights where you've used cannabis, what do you notice about your sleep? Tell us about your dreaming. We hear two things. People say, I sleep hard. I sleep and I mean it. And I don't dream. The reason why is that a regular sleep cycle is completely thrown off. REM sleep is where rapid eye movement sleep is where we do our dreaming. Non-REM, probably the most well-known is stage 4 or deep sleep. What happens after cannabis use is that deep sleep gets extended, which can account for someone's subjective sense that they slept hard and they don't go into rapid eye movement or REM sleep. That's why they report not dreaming. Who cares? What's the impact of a night's sleep that's been disrupted like that? You see increases the next day in anxiety, in daytime sleepiness, in irritability, depending on what's going on with other people in their life, and an increase in physical jumpiness, all packaged nicely with a quality of sleep that wasn't so hot.
You know, we get a lot of comments here in Iowa about youth that feel like they're being commercialized, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, and a lot in politics. And, you know, they think that the system, the white middle class old guys with gray hair like me are manipulating youth to do what they want them to do. And so what we see is a climate where they're willing to challenge a lot of ideas, like you said, a thirst for knowledge. And I'm reminded of my own effort to get better sleep, a wearable. Kids have Apple Watches, they have Fitbits, things like that they can wear and determine. Are they putting two and two together and looking at those sleep patterns? And are they, I mean, I didn't know anything about sleep when I was a college student. You know, at that point, that wasn't an area of science that I was exposed to in any general classes in my studies in geology and English. But the fact of the matter is that today, people get more information about themselves than ever before. Is it working to make the potential consumer of marijuana a little bit smarter, wiser, and maybe one that might use some avoidance?
I do think we do what we can. We always make clear people can make the choices they want to make. If there's science that connects dots that they weren't previously connecting, I think that can be useful. I mean, again, if students say, I really want to do well in school, how you doing? Not the way I want. What's getting in the way of that? I'm anxious, I'm tired, I'm stressed. When we bring in science that shows that it is their nighttime use that could be actually worsening or even causing those very things, people might decide to make changes in their substance use. I think that the thing that's cool about sleep, and I geek out about this stuff, is even going back to Psych 101, Pavlov, and conditioning. What we're finding is that so many behavioral changes people can make can impact their sleep. We ask students since coming to college, how's your sleep been? Where do you study? In my bedroom. Where do you study? On my bed. Pavlov showed us that if you put food in front of a dog, it salivates. If you put food in front of a dog and ring a bell, it looks at you funny. But if you keep doing food and a bell, in time ring the bell, the dog salivates. Your bed should be a cue for get sleepy, fall asleep. And if people sit on their bed, open up a book, turn on a light, start to study, they're pairing their bed with stress and worry. Do that for 2 weeks, and what happens as soon as you turn off your light? Oh, I still have to work on that paper. What if I'm doing? You can literally breed sleep problems. So what we find is the more people can, keep those cues clean, keep your bed for bed stuff, go study in the library, sit under a tree and go like this, and they'll take your picture and put it on the website. Like, do things that keep those cues clean can be really impactful.
Some interesting correlations here with what people talk about with excessive social media use and gaming, all things that impinge heavily on sleep. And then often are also users of marijuana. You see an increased marijuana use for people that stay up the longest and get the least amount of sleep in that age group. When we're looking at teens and all of that knowledge, or how, we know the majority of kids are not using.
Correct.
So a lot of what we do as we're talking here is to also empower those that aren't using to help those that are. How critically does impact? I mean, if you have somebody that's been using for a month, 2 months, 3 months, at some point, how dominant is the addiction so that without an intervention, treatment, or other kind of support, they're likely stuck in this vicious cycle?
I think that more of that from a longitudinal perspective could be studied. A legend in this field, George Valent, talked about the concept of the natural history of addiction, and showed that with alcohol, there are a number of people that decide to stop using and do so with no formal treatment, no formal intervention. It kind of depends on what someone feels like they need. I think that letting people know about the rates of abstinence become important, because among the people with the most mispronounced perceptions of the prevalence of cannabis use are those that use most heavily. And if someone uses daily and they're convinced that everyone uses daily too, they're probably going to think, if I quit, it'll be like me. I'll be the only one not using. We might support the confidence and optimism that someone can change if we let people know, if you decide to quit, you'd be making the decision that most of your peers have made as well.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and afterwards we're going to ask Dr. Kilmer to share some final comments, insights, and inspiration. You don't want to miss this. Stay tuned.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power, and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared, and you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Or maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about the science of marijuana and academic outcomes with Dr. Jason Kilmer from the University of Washington. And it's not just academics, it's also sleep. All of these things affect us. Let's see what insights, advice, and inspiration Dr. Kilmer has to share with us. Jason?
I would just say this. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, I think students are so hungry for the science. I think that there's so many advances in the science. I know that there's the ability to have a link for your viewers to a project that I was a part of compiling. We had researchers in the state of Washington from University of Washington and Washington State University generate a consensus statement on what do people need to know about high potency cannabis. What does this mean for people? And we generated a consensus statement. Everyone signed off and says, we agree on this. What's very, very clear is these high potency products have huge implications for mental health, for addiction potential, for you name it. And I think just letting people see what the science says, the science speaks for itself pretty compellingly.
It's no surprise that the marijuana industry, like tobacco and alcohol, that sort of profits off of addiction, would trend towards these high potency formulations that, I mean, I call them predatory. I don't know any other reason. We don't see a sound medical basis for those concentrations anywhere, do we?
I think that the research on medical is advancing. We're largely looking outside the country to see where there would be potential medical uses for people. But more randomized controlled trials, things that can account for placebo effects or what people expect will happen. So much of that research needs to be done. What's very, very clear is the potencies we're seeing today are unprecedented.
Do you think that there's a silver lining here, that at the same time we see this explosion of marijuana and in their dialogues around the country, that the kids are sort of taking it with a grain of salt, and sort of because there's so much emphasis, maybe there's some natural sort of skepticism that's driving them to look at the research?
I mean, if people are looking at science, I think that's a great thing, says the researcher. But I do think that when we look at reasons for promise and hope, it's that, most kids aren't using, most college students aren't using. And those that are wondering what's really going on out there, we're increasing access to what the science says and making that easier for people to digest and understand.
And so for those that aren't using, that watch the show and have a passionate, sort of compassionate sort of sense of their life and the world around them, it's really good if they would help their friends they know are users try and learn more about this to help them abstain from that use.
People get, we can see that people who are choosing to use cannabis might be really big fans of that. And so, it's tough. If you feel like you're arguing with someone, a lot of times they might just get more defensive. What we've really heard people say is we try and let the science and the data tell the story for us as best as we can.
That's fantastic. Jason, thank you so much for sharing the information. We encourage everyone to go to our website or the links you see on the show to look at the research and learn the truth about marijuana. And thank you all for watching us today. Check out our website, ahealthyiowa.org, and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.